I think we've seen enough from this black man. Philip Whitaker closed the manila folder with a dismissive snap. His thin lips curled into what might have passed for a smile if it had reached his eyes. Unfortunately, Pinnacle Financial won't be able to approve your loan application at this time. Dominic Reynolds sat perfectly still, his expression betraying nothing. The custom Italian suit he wore had cost more than Whitaker probably made in a month, and the watch on his wrist, a subtle Patek Philippe, could have paid for a luxury car. Not that Whitaker had noticed either. For the past 40 minutes, the branch manager had barely made eye contact. "May I ask why?" Dominic's voice was measured, controlled. "My credit score is 820. I've provided 3 years of tax returns showing annual income well above your threshold requirements. My debt-to-income ratio is practically non-existent." The branch was quiet this Thursday afternoon. Through the glass walls of Whitaker's office, Dominic could see 2 tellers chatting idly. A young couple with a toddler was filling out paperwork with another banker. Normal, everyday banking, except there was nothing normal about what was happening in this office. Whitaker leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Banking is about relationships, Mr. Reynolds, about trust, about understanding who we're lending to." His emphasis on who sent a clear message. "And frankly, people like you don't have the financial literacy to handle this kind of investment. Maybe try something more suitable for your situation." The words hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Dominic had heard versions of this speech before. Different words, same meaning. "I have an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of experience in investment banking. Would you care to elaborate on what you mean by people like me and my situation?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Whitaker's face. "Look, we both know how this works. These luxury commercial properties in Westview, they're not exactly compatible with your demographic. The loan committee would have concerns about your ability to attract the right clientele." And there it was, not even thinly veiled anymore. Dominic reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder. I anticipated some hesitation, so I brought additional documentation. These are projections based on similar developments I've consulted on in Chicago, Atlanta, and Houston. You'll see the ROI exceeded expectations by— Whitaker cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Mr. Reynolds, this isn't about paperwork. Some investments are simply high risk, and Pinnacle Financial has a responsibility to its shareholders." Dominic felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "The property is in an up-and-coming area. 3 major corporations have announced plans to open offices within 2 blocks. The city has approved a revitalization plan that includes improved infrastructure and tax incentives." "Yes, well," Whitaker's smile was cold. "These urban renewal projects have a way of disappointing. One day it's up and coming, the next day it's back to being a ghetto." The mask slipped. The ugly truth beneath revealed itself. Dominic stood slowly, straightening his tie. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Whitaker's smile widened. "I am the senior loan officer at this branch, Mr. Reynolds. All final decisions go through me." "Then I'd like to file a formal complaint." "Of course," Whitaker's tone was patronizing. "You're welcome to contact our customer relations department. I believe they typically respond within 30 business days." He slid a business card across the desk. "Though I should warn you, making unfounded accusations won't reflect well on your future banking relationships." The threat was clear. Dominic had seen this playbook before. File a complaint, wait weeks for a response, get a form letter apologizing for the misunderstanding. Nothing changes. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm not leaving until I speak with someone else about this decision." Dominic's voice had dropped an octave, calm but firm. The branch manager's face hardened. "Mr. Reynolds, I've made my decision. This meeting is over." "This isn't over. Your decision is based on discriminatory practices, not financial considerations. I'm well within my rights to—" Whitaker reached for his phone. "Security?" Yes, we have a situation in my office, a rejected applicant becoming aggressive. I need assistance immediately. Aggressive? I haven't raised my voice or made any threats. Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. Whitaker stood, pointing toward the door. Security is on their way. Don't make this more embarrassing than it needs to be. Dominic could feel eyes on him from the main floor of the bank. The tellers had stopped their conversation. The young couple was staring at him. A mother pulled her child closer, as though Dominic were dangerous. So, this is how Pinnacle Financial treats qualified applicants? Dominic asked loud enough for others to hear. This is how we treat people who don't understand the word no. Now please leave before I'm forced to call the police. 2 security guards appeared at the door, hands hovering near their belts. Sir, we need you to exit the building, the taller one said. Dominic looked from the guards back to Whitaker, who was now smirking openly. The public humiliation was clearly part of the plan. Make an example of him. Show everyone who really had the power here. Of course, Dominic said quietly, gathering his documents. As he slipped the folders back into his briefcase, his phone began to ring. Dominic checked the screen and felt a calm wash over him. Perfect timing. Excuse me, I need to take this, he said, answering the call. Xavier, good afternoon. Yes, I'm actually just wrapping up that branch visit now. He paused, listening. No, it was quite illuminating. I'll be heading to the executive board meeting shortly. I have plenty to discuss. He continued his conversation. Yes, the quarterly review of branch performance. I'm particularly interested in discussing loan approval metrics. Another pause. Of course, Xavier, as CEO, you should definitely be concerned about what I found today. Dominic ended the call and turned back to Whitaker, whose smug expression had been replaced with confusion and the first flickers of fear. Mr. Whitaker, Dominic said, his voice perfectly calm. That was Xavier Thompson, CEO of Global Finance Group, your parent company. It seems we'll be continuing our discussion after all, just not here and not today. I look forward to seeing you at corporate headquarters very soon. He walked past the stunned security guards and through the main floor of the bank, head held high. As he pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon sunlight, he could feel Whitaker's eyes boring into his back. Have you ever been judged before someone even knew your name? Comment yes if you've experienced prejudice firsthand.
Philip Whitaker poured himself a generous glass of scotch and sank into his leather office chair. The bank had closed an hour ago, but he needed time to think. The confrontation with Reynolds had left him unsettled. Xavier Thompson, CEO of Global Finance Group. The name echoed in his mind, along with Reynolds' parting words. I look forward to seeing you at corporate headquarters very soon. It was probably nothing. Reynolds must have been bluffing, a desperate move to intimidate him after being rejected. People like that always tried to name-drop when they were cornered. Still, something about Reynolds' confidence bothered him. Whitaker took another swig of scotch, savoring the burn. He'd been managing this branch for 8 years. He knew how to handle difficult applicants. It was practically an art form. His eyes drifted to the wall of commendations behind his desk. 6 consecutive Branch Manager of the Year awards. Recognition for maintaining the highest profit margins in the regional district. Letters of appreciation from the board of directors. They didn't hand out accolades like that to managers who took unnecessary risks on questionable applicants. Whitaker had learned early in his career that banking was about patterns and predictions, and the patterns were clear. Certain neighborhoods were bad investments. Certain demographics were statistically higher risk. He wasn't racist. He was realistic. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa in HR. Still on for drinks tomorrow? Tyler and Melissa are joining. Whitaker smiled. Vanessa had been instrumental in helping him navigate the occasional discrimination complaints. As head of human resources for the regional office, she knew how to make problems disappear. A rewording here, a procedural technicality there, and suddenly an angry applicant's complaint became an unsubstantiated allegation. "Absolutely," he texted back. "The usual spot at 7. He finished his scotch and began packing up his briefcase. Tomorrow would be another day of protecting Pinnacle Financial's interests, another day of making smart, calculated decisions about who deserved the bank's trust and who didn't. "You should have seen his face when I rejected him, like I just canceled Christmas," Whitaker laughed, gesturing with his martini glass. The upscale bar was crowded with the after-work banking crowd. Vanessa Harrington from HR giggled, already on her second Cosmopolitan. What was wrong with his application? Bad credit? Insufficient income? "Nothing technically wrong," Whitaker admitted, "but you know how it is. He wanted to develop commercial property in Westview. Can you imagine? That neighborhood would run any legitimate business into the ground within 6 months. Tyler Bergman, manager of the downtown branch, nodded knowingly. "Those urban investment projects are always a disaster. Remember that restaurant development on East Side? Total failure." "Exactly," Whitaker said. "I was doing him a favor, really, saving him from himself." "So what was the official reason?" Melissa Cooper asked. As a loan officer at Whitaker's branch, she had watched the confrontation unfold from her desk. "Oh, you know, the usual. Insufficient demonstrated experience with comparable investments. Vague enough to be defensible, specific enough to sound legitimate." Whitaker smirked. He tried to argue, but I shut that down quickly. "Did he pull the race card?" Tyler asked, lowering his voice. "He was getting there. Started talking about filing a complaint. That's when I called security." He chuckled. "You should have seen how fast everyone on the main floor backed away when security showed up, like they thought he was going to rob the place." Everyone laughed except Melissa, who stirred her drink uncomfortably. "What was his name again?" Vanessa asked, pulling out her phone. "I should make a note in case he actually files something." "Reynolds, Dominic Reynolds," though he tried to act like he was on a first-name basis with Xavier Thompson. Vanessa nearly choked on her drink. "Xavier Thompson? As in the CEO of our parent company?" "Yeah, pulled that name out of nowhere when security showed up. Said they were meeting later or something. Complete BS, obviously." Vanessa's expression changed. "Phil, you might want to Google this guy." "Why? So I can see his failed startup or whatever hole-in-the-wall business he runs?" "I'm serious." She passed her phone over. "Look." Whitaker took the phone and felt his stomach drop. On the screen was a Forbes article from last month. "Rising Stars in Finance, Dominic Reynolds' Quiet Ascension." Below was a photo of Reynolds in the same immaculate suit he'd worn to the bank, standing beside none other than Xavier Thompson at some charity gala. "This has to be a different Reynolds," Whitaker muttered, scanning the article. Following a distinguished career at Goldman Sachs, Reynolds has become a key strategic advisor to several major financial institutions, including Global Finance Group, where rumors suggest he may soon take on a more formal leadership role. The table fell silent. "Why would someone like that apply for a commercial loan at a branch?" Tyler finally asked. "Doesn't make sense." "Mystery shopping," Melissa said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Corporate's been sending people to evaluate branches, testing customer service, loan procedures, compliance with anti-discrimination policies." "That's ridiculous," Whitaker scoffed, but his confidence was wavering.
Why wouldn't I be informed? That's the whole point, isn't it? To see how branches operate when they don't know they're being watched. There have been rumors about it for weeks. Whitaker's phone rang, breaking the tense silence. The caller ID displayed his regional manager's number. At 8:30 p.m., never a good sign. "Richard," he answered, trying to sound casual, "what can I do for you?" "Whitaker," Richard Henderson's voice was clipped, "I need you at corporate headquarters tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Thompson's office." Whitaker felt the blood drain from his face. "Thompson's office? May I ask what this is regarding?" "No, you may not. Just be there." The call ended abruptly. Whitaker lowered the phone slowly, aware that everyone at the table was staring at him. "Everything okay?" Tyler asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "I've been called to corporate. Tomorrow morning. Thompson's office." Whitaker's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "That's not good timing," Vanessa winced. "It's probably about the quarterly review or the new lending initiative." But as he signaled for another drink, a cold knot of fear was forming in his stomach. After 8 years of carefully curated success, had his system finally caught up with him? Some people believe prejudice doesn't exist anymore. Would you have approved Dominic's loan based on his financials alone? Drop your thoughts below.
Philip Whitaker arrived at Global Finance Group's headquarters 30 minutes early, his silk tie feeling unusually tight around his neck. The gleaming 50-story building in the heart of the financial district was a world away from his comfortable branch office. Here, he was small fish, and he knew it. The security guard at the front desk checked his ID with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Whitaker, you're expected on the 48th floor, executive suite." The elevator ride gave Whitaker time to rehearse his explanations. Reynolds' application had raised legitimate concerns. The Westview development was speculative at best. His decision was based on sound financial reasoning, not personal bias. He delivered these lines so many times they sounded convincing even to himself. When the elevator doors opened on the 48th floor, Whitaker was met by an immaculately dressed receptionist. "Mr. Whitaker, they're expecting you in the main boardroom. Follow me, please." They? Whitaker had expected a one-on-one with Thompson. Maybe Richard from Regional would be there too. But the receptionist's wording suggested a larger audience. As they walked down the hallway, Whitaker noticed the atmosphere was unusually tense. Junior executives huddled in whispered conversations, falling silent as he passed. A group of analysts stopped their discussion to watch him with undisguised curiosity. "Do you know what this meeting is about?" Whitaker asked the receptionist, trying to sound casual. "I believe it's the quarterly branch performance review. Here we are." She opened a heavy oak door to reveal a sprawling boardroom. Around a massive table of polished mahogany sat the entire executive leadership team of Global Finance Group. Xavier Thompson, the CEO, was engaged in quiet conversation with the CFO. The general counsel was reviewing documents with 2 associates. Altogether, at least 15 high-ranking executives filled the room. And at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat Dominic Reynolds. Whitaker froze in the doorway, his carefully prepared narrative evaporating instantly. "Ah, Mr. Whitaker." Xavier Thompson looked up. "Thank you for joining us. Please, take a seat." He gestured to the single empty chair directly across from Reynolds. On rubbery legs, Whitaker made his way to the chair. Reynolds watched him with an unreadable expression, perfectly composed in another impeccable suit. No hint of the man who'd been dismissed and humiliated just yesterday. "Mr. Whitaker," Xavier Thompson continued, once Whitaker was seated, "I believe you've already met Dominic Reynolds, our newly appointed chairman of the board and majority shareholder of Global Finance Group." The room spun slightly. Chairman? Majority shareholder?
Whitaker gripped the arms of his chair to steady himself. Whitaker's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. We met briefly yesterday. There seems to have been some confusion about— No confusion, Mr. Whitaker, Reynolds interrupted, his voice calm and measured. I visited your branch yesterday in my capacity as chairman to assess our customer service firsthand, a practice I've implemented across all our subsidiaries. He opened a folder in front of him, the same folder Whitaker had dismissively snapped shut yesterday. I presented myself as a potential borrower with excellent credit, substantial assets, and a sound business proposal. By all standard metrics, the application should have been approved, or at minimum, given serious consideration. Reynolds looked directly at Whitaker. Instead, I was informed that people like me lack the financial literacy to handle such investments, that my proposed development would turn into a ghetto. And when I attempted to address these concerns professionally, I was threatened with security and publicly humiliated. Whitaker felt sweat beading on his forehead. Mr. Reynolds, if I had known who you were— That's precisely the problem, isn't it? Reynolds cut in. You treated me differently based on what you could see, not based on the merits of my application. He turned to the others. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Whitaker didn't know he was dealing with the chairman of his parent company. He thought he was dealing with just another black loan applicant he could dismiss without consequences. Murmurs spread around the table. The general counsel was taking detailed notes. Mr. Whitaker, Thompson said, his tone severe, Mr. Reynolds implements these undercover visits because they reveal how our institutions actually operate when executives aren't watching. Yesterday's incident was disturbing, to say the least. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Whitaker began, desperation creeping into his voice. My concerns were purely financial. Were they? Reynolds opened another folder. Because we've been reviewing your loan approval patterns for the past 3 years, and they tell a different story. He nodded to a woman seated halfway down the table. Miss Chen, would you please share your findings? Sophia Chen, a sharp-featured woman with a tablet computer, stood. Our audit reveals that under Mr. Whitaker's management, loan applications from white applicants with credit scores between 700 and 750 were approved at a rate of 86%. For non-white applicants with identical credit scores and comparable financial profiles, the approval rate was 24%. She swiped to another screen. For applications involving properties in predominantly white neighborhoods, the approval rate was 92%. For properties in racially diverse neighborhoods, even affluent ones, it dropped to 37%. Whitaker felt the room closing in on him. Those statistics don't account for other risk factors that we controlled for all standard risk factors, Chen interrupted coolly. Income level, debt-to-income ratio, employment history, property values, market trends, the disparity remained consistent. Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Whitaker, I don't believe we finished our conversation yesterday. You said banking is about relationships and trust, about understanding who you're lending to. It seems you've been making those determinations based on factors that are both unethical and illegal. I've always followed company guidelines, Whitaker protested weakly. All of my decisions have been within established parameters, which is why we're also reviewing those parameters, Thompson interjected, but your application of them has been selective at best. Reynolds pulled out yet another document. This isn't the first time concerns have been raised about your practices, Mr. Whitaker. We've identified 27 formal complaints alleging discriminatory treatment filed against you personally over the past 5 years. Whitaker felt a flicker of relief. Those complaints had all been dismissed. Vanessa had seen to that. As if reading his mind, Reynolds continued. Interestingly, all 27 were dismissed following reviews by Regional HR Director Vanessa Harrington, with whom you have a close personal relationship. Miss Harrington is being interviewed by our compliance team as we speak. The last pillar of Whitaker's defense crumbled. Mr. Whitaker, Reynolds said, his voice unnervingly calm. Yesterday you told me that actions have consequences. You were right about that. The question now is what consequences your actions should have. The executives around the table watched with varying expressions of disgust and disappointment. Whitaker realized with sickening clarity that his career was hanging by a thread, and Reynolds held the scissors. Whitaker struggled to find the words that might save him. I've maintained excellent performance metrics. My branch consistently ranks among the most profitable in... Profitability built on discrimination isn't something to boast about, Thompson cut in sharply. It's a liability, legally, ethically, and financially. Reynolds nodded. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Mr. Whitaker, this isn't just about one rejected application. It's about a pattern of behavior that violates everything this institution claims to stand for. He stood, commanding the room with his presence. Tomorrow we will announce a comprehensive overhaul of our lending practices across our subsidiaries, including Pinnacle Financial. We will also be launching a thorough investigation into all branches to identify and address similar patterns of discrimination. He turned his gaze back to Whitaker. But first, we need to address the immediate issue. Mr. Whitaker, your actions have exposed this company to significant legal liability, damaged our reputation, and violated the trust of the communities we serve. The verdict was coming. He could feel it approaching like an oncoming train. Before we proceed, Reynolds said, do you have anything else you'd like to say in your defense? All eyes in the boardroom turned to Whitaker. His mouth was dry, his mind racing for something, anything that might save him. Imagine finding out the person you disrespected controls your entire career. Have you ever misjudged someone who turned out to be important? Subscribe to hear what happens next.
This is completely unfair, Whitaker blurted, desperation replacing his usual calculated demeanor. You're judging my entire career based on one interaction, one application. That's hardly representative of my overall approach to lending. Reynolds remained impassive, but several executives exchanged glances. Whitaker seized what he perceived as an opening. My branch maintains the highest profitability ratings in the region precisely because I'm careful about risk assessment. He continued, gaining confidence. The statistical disparities Ms. Chen mentioned don't tell the full story. There are numerous qualitative factors that influence loan decisions, factors that can't be captured in raw numbers. Such as? Reynolds asked, his tone neutral. Community stability, business viability, market trends that aren't yet reflected in property valuations. Whitaker was on familiar ground now, regurgitating the same justifications he'd used for years. These require judgment calls based on experience. My experience. Thompson leaned forward. And you believe your judgment is free from bias? I believe my judgment is based on financial realities, not personal preferences. The lending business isn't about making people feel good. It's about protecting the bank's assets. Interesting perspective, Reynolds said. So, you maintain that your rejection of qualified applicants from certain racial backgrounds and neighborhoods was based purely on financial realities. I maintain that correlation doesn't equal causation, Whitaker said, feeling steadier. If applicants from certain demographics are rejected more frequently, that reflects broader socioeconomic patterns, not personal bias. Reynolds nodded to Chen, who tapped her tablet. A large screen at the end of the boardroom illuminated with a recording. Whitaker felt his stomach lurch as he recognized his own voice. These urban renewal projects have a way of disappointing. One day it's up and coming, the next day it's back to being a ghetto. His words echoed in the silent boardroom. Chen swiped again, and another recording played. People like you don't have the financial literacy to handle this kind of investment. Maybe try something more suitable for your situation. Whitaker's face burned. Those statements are being taken out of context.
Then please, Reynolds said, explain the context in which referring to a neighborhood as a ghetto and making assumptions about someone's financial literacy based on their appearance would be appropriate in a professional banking environment. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. In the heat of the moment, my phrasing may have been imperfect, but my underlying concerns about the investment were valid. Were they? Reynolds pulled out another document. Because our development team independently assessed the same Westview property yesterday afternoon. Their conclusion is that it represents one of the most promising investment opportunities in the city, with projected returns significantly above market average. He slid the analysis across the table. Whitaker didn't need to read it to know what it said. Perhaps this is all a misunderstanding. Whitaker tried, changing tactics. I've always strived to uphold the bank's standards. If those standards are changing, I'm more than willing to adapt my approach. The standards aren't changing, Mr. Whitaker, Thompson said firmly. Equal treatment of all qualified applicants has always been our policy. What's changing is our willingness to look the other way when that policy is violated. Whitaker glanced around the table, searching for a sympathetic face. Finding none, he reached for his phone. If you'll excuse me for just a moment, I'd like to contact Vanessa in HR. She can verify that all previous complaints were thoroughly investigated and— Miss Harrington is currently being questioned by our compliance team, Thompson interrupted. And I'm afraid her credibility as a character witness has been somewhat compromised by the discovery of text messages between the two of you discussing how to handle discrimination complaints. Whitaker's hand froze above his phone. You accessed our private communications? That's a violation of— They were sent on company devices, Mr. Whitaker. The general counsel spoke for the first time. The employee handbook explicitly states that all communications on company property are subject to monitoring. Section 4.3, paragraph 2, which you signed acknowledgement of annually for the past 8 years. Whitaker's mind raced. This was spiraling out of control. He needed to regain ground, find some leverage. Listen, he said, lowering his voice and leaning forward. We all know how this works. Every bank has approval metrics. Every institution makes judgment calls. I'm simply the one being made an example of because Mr. Reynolds had a personal experience he didn't like. A chill settled over the boardroom. Reynolds' expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Is that your defense, Mr. Whitaker? That everyone discriminates, so you shouldn't be held accountable for doing the same? I'm saying this is selective enforcement. If you audited every branch manager with the same scrutiny, you'd find similar patterns. I'm being singled out. You may be right, Reynolds conceded, surprising Whitaker, which is precisely why this investigation won't stop with you. Every branch, every manager, every policy will be reviewed, but that doesn't absolve you of your actions. Whitaker felt sweat trickling down his back. His usual confidence was crumbling by the second. I have an exemplary record, 8 years of service, 6 Branch Manager of the Year awards. My methods have consistently generated profits for this institution. At what cost? How many deserving applicants were denied opportunity? How many communities were denied investment? How many businesses never had the chance to grow because you decided, based on nothing more than appearance or address, that they weren't worthy of consideration? Whitaker had no answer. Your awards and accolades were based on metrics that failed to account for equal treatment. That's a failure of our evaluation system, one we're correcting immediately. Whitaker realized with growing dread that there was no path to redemption here, no clever argument that would save his position. The best he could hope for now was damage control. I recognize that improvements can be made, he said, forcing contrition into his voice. Perhaps a period of additional training and supervision would— Mr. Whitaker, this isn't about training. The issue isn't that you don't know how to evaluate loan applications fairly. The issue is that you deliberately chose not to. The recordings make that abundantly clear. Everyone deserves a second chance, Whitaker pleaded, abandoning all pretense of dignity now.
I have a mortgage, a family to support, 15 years in this industry. If you terminate me with a discrimination claim, I'll never work in banking again." For the first time, Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "You're right. Everyone does deserve a second chance, which is why we're giving second chances to all the qualified applicants you rejected based on discriminatory criteria." He turned to Thompson Axvey. "Xavier, I believe our legal and compliance team have everything they need. Unless there are further questions for Mr. Whitaker, I suggest we proceed to the next phase." Thompson nodded and turned to Whitaker. "Mr. Whitaker, please wait outside while the board deliberates. Ms. Vasquez will escort you." A stern-faced woman, presumably the chief compliance officer, gestured toward the door. Whitaker stood on unsteady legs, straightening his jacket in a futile attempt to maintain some dignity. As he walked toward the door, Reynolds spoke once more. "Mr. Whitaker, regardless of the board's decision, I want to thank you for one thing." Whitaker turned, a flicker of hope igniting. "Yes?" "You've provided us with perfect clarity about what needs to change in this organization. Sometimes it takes seeing the worst of a system to imagine its best possible version." The hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. This wasn't gratitude. It was a eulogy for his career. In the hallway, Whitaker collapsed into a chair, loosening his tie to breathe more easily. Through the closed door, he could hear the muffled voices of the executives discussing his fate, his future, his legacy. After 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours, the door opened. "Mr. Whitaker," Thompson called, "we're ready for you now. What would you do if you were Dominic? Show mercy or demand accountability? Comment below with your decision."
Dominic Reynolds gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office on the 50th floor of Global Finance Group headquarters. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Whitaker, and the ripple effects were still spreading throughout the organization. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning from the view. Gabriela Vasquez, Chief Compliance Officer, entered with a thick binder under her arm. Behind her came Sophia Chen, leading the audit team, and Xavier Thompson, looking grave. "The preliminary findings are worse than we anticipated," Gabriela began, without preamble, placing the binder on Dominic's desk. Whitaker wasn't an outlier. He was a symptom of systemic issues across multiple branches. Dominic gestured for them to sit. "Walk me through it." Sophia opened her laptop. "We've analyzed loan application data from all 342 Pinnacle Financial branches over the past 5 years. The pattern is consistent. Applicants of color are 2.8 times more likely to be rejected than white applicants with identical financial profiles." "And the geographic disparities?" Dominic asked. "Even more pronounced," Sophia continued. "Properties in predominantly white neighborhoods receive approval rates of 88% when all financial factors are controlled for. In diverse neighborhoods, that drops to 37%. In predominantly Black or Hispanic neighborhoods, it falls to 22%. Xavier shook his head in dismay. "The legal exposure here is enormous. We're looking at potential class action lawsuits, regulatory penalties, not to mention the reputational damage." "The legal consequences are important," Dominic agreed, "but I'm more concerned about the human impact. Every rejected application represents a dream deferred, a business that never launched, a family that couldn't buy a home." He flipped open the binder, scanning the executive summary. "What about Whitaker's claim that this is standard practice across the industry?" "Unfortunately, he wasn't entirely wrong about that," Gabriela admitted. "Banking discrimination is pervasive, but that doesn't make it acceptable, and it certainly doesn't make it legal." "And it doesn't mean we can't lead the change," Dominic added. "Have you identified any branches that are doing it right?" Sophia nodded, her expression brightening slightly. "Actually, yes. 27 branches show approval rates with no statistically significant disparities across racial or geographic lines. Their overall default rates are actually lower than the branches with discriminatory patterns." Which confirms what we already knew, Dominic said. Discrimination isn't just wrong, it's bad business. We're leaving money on the table by not investing in qualified applicants and promising communities. He stood and walked back to the window, thinking, I want to meet with the managers of those 27 branches. They should be leading our reform efforts, not the executives who've been overlooking these problems for years. There's something else you should see, Gabriella said, turning to a specific section in the binder. We've begun reaching out to applicants who were improperly denied loans. The stories are heartbreaking. Dominic returned to his desk and examined the profiles Gabriella had highlighted. Marcus Wilson, small business owner, credit score 795, denied a $50,000 loan to expand his successful catering business. Reason cited, insufficient business stability, despite 5 years of growing profits. He flipped to the next page. Elena Gonzalez, architect, credit score 810, denied a mortgage for a home in Lakeside neighborhood despite income 6 times the monthly payment. Reason? Concerns about property appreciation in what's been the fastest appreciating district for 3 consecutive years. There are hundreds more just like them, Sophia said quietly. Dominic closed the binder, his resolve hardening. I want to meet them, not just as data points in a report, but as people. Their stories need to be heard, by our board, by our executives, and by the public. Xavier looked concerned. Going public with this could be risky. The shareholders elected me to transform this institution. That's exactly what I intend to do. Transparency isn't just the right approach ethically, it's also the smartest strategy. We acknowledge the problem, take full responsibility, and lead the industry in fixing it. Gabriella nodded approvingly. I've drafted a comprehensive reform plan. She handed Dominic another document. It includes standardized application review procedures, mandatory bias training, anonymous application processing, community investment initiatives, and quarterly equity audits. Dominic scanned the document. This is excellent, but it doesn't go far enough. I want to establish a $100 million community development fund, specifically targeting neighborhoods that have been historically denied investment. And I want a dedicated team to review every application that was improperly rejected over the past 5 years, with authority to reverse those decisions immediately. That's ambitious, Xavier said carefully. It's necessary, Dominic replied, and it's just the beginning. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dominic's assistant poked her head in. Mr. Reynolds, Elijah Morris is here for his 2 o'clock appointment. Perfect timing. Please send him in. A moment later, a young black man in a crisp suit entered the office. His expression was guarded, uncertain. Mr. Morris, thank you for coming, Dominic said, extending his hand. I believe you have a story our executive team needs to hear. Elijah shook his hand hesitantly. I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here. Your office just said it was regarding my loan application from last year. That's right, Dominic confirmed. You applied for a business loan at Pinnacle Financial's downtown branch. You wanted to expand your software development company. Which was denied, Elijah said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Despite my perfect credit score, existing contracts, and 3 years of profit. The application was handled by Philip Whitaker. Elijah's expression hardened at the name. That's right. He said my business model was unsustainable and my client base was unreliable, though he never actually reviewed my client list, which includes 3 Fortune 500 companies. Mr. Morris, I want to apologize on behalf of Global Finance Group for the way you were treated. Your application should have been approved, and the decision to reject it was based on discriminatory practices, not sound financial judgment. Elijah looked stunned. Thank you for acknowledging that. But with all due respect, an apology doesn't help me grow my business. I ended up taking out high-interest loans elsewhere, which I'm still paying off. That's actually why I asked you here today. I'd like to offer you the loan you should have received last year at a preferential interest rate to compensate for the delay and additional costs you incurred. Elijah blinked in surprise. Just like that? With proper documentation, of course, but yes, just like that. Furthermore, I'd like to offer you something else, a position on our newly formed Community Banking Advisory Board. We need people who've experienced discrimination firsthand to help us rebuild this institution from the ground up. Elijah studied Dominic carefully. Why the sudden change? Banking hasn't exactly been a beacon of equality and fairness. Because I experienced the same discrimination you did, Dominic replied simply. The only difference is I was in a position to do something about it. He briefly recounted his encounter with Whitaker. So what happened to him? Mr. Whitaker has been terminated along with several others who enabled and participated in discriminatory practices, Xavier answered. But more importantly, we're changing the systems that allowed them to operate that way in the first place. Dominic handed Elijah the reform plan. This is just the beginning. We want your input, your criticism, your ideas. Real change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from listening to the people who've been excluded from the system. Elijah reviewed the document thoughtfully. This is comprehensive, and honestly, not what I expected from a major financial institution. We're not asking for praise. We're asking for partnership. Will you help us? After a moment of consideration, Elijah nodded. I'm in. But I won't be the only voice at the table, right? You need diverse perspectives. Absolutely, Gabriella agreed. We're assembling a board that reflects the communities we serve. Your experience in tech will be invaluable, but we're also bringing in small business owners, community organizers, housing advocates, and others. As the meeting continued, Dominic felt a growing sense of purpose. The discrimination he'd faced from Whitaker, an experience all too familiar throughout his life, was being transformed into an opportunity for systemic change. And somewhere across town, Philip Whitaker was learning just how thorough that change would be. We've all seen institutions protect the wrong people. Share this video if you believe companies should be held accountable for discrimination.
Philip Whitaker sat in his attorney's office, staring blankly at the legal documents spread across the table. 3 weeks after being escorted from Global Finance Group headquarters, his world had collapsed with breathtaking speed. These terms are non-negotiable, Barbara Winters, his attorney, explained grimly. Global Finance Group is offering to waive any civil claims against you personally in exchange for your full cooperation with their internal investigation and public statement of accountability. And if I refuse? Whitaker asked, though he already knew the answer. They'll pursue all available legal remedies, including potential criminal charges for fraud, wire fraud, and violations of multiple federal banking regulations. Barbara's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Given the evidence they've collected, I strongly advise against fighting this. Whitaker rubbed his temples. So I have to sign a statement admitting to discrimination? Destroy my entire reputation and career? Your career in banking is over regardless, Barbara said bluntly. The question now is whether you'll face financial ruin and possible jail time as well. Before Whitaker could respond, his phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down at the screen and felt what little color remained drain from his face. Breaking. Global Finance Group announces sweeping reforms after discovering systematic discrimination at subsidiary banks. With shaking fingers, he opened the article. Prominently displayed was a photo of Dominic Reynolds at a press conference, flanked by Xavier Thompson and other executives. "Turn on the TV," he muttered to Barbara. "Channel 7. She complied, and Reynolds' voice filled the room. Discovered deeply troubling patterns of discrimination that violate everything we stand for as a financial institution. Today, I am announcing comprehensive reforms to address these failures and to make amends to the communities and individuals who have been harmed by these practices." The camera panned to show a diverse group of people standing behind Reynolds, presumably some of the applicants who had been unfairly denied loans.
We are establishing a $100 million community development fund, specifically targeting neighborhoods that have been systematically denied investment. We are implementing rigorous new application review procedures to eliminate bias, and we are personally reaching out to every applicant who was improperly rejected over the past 5 years to offer them the opportunity they deserved from the beginning. Reynolds' gaze seemed to burn through the screen directly into Whitaker's soul as he continued. This isn't just about making amends. It's about acknowledging a fundamental truth. Discrimination isn't just wrong morally, it's bad business. By denying qualified applicants based on race or address, we weren't protecting our institution. We were actively harming it, depriving it of profitable investments and valuable relationships. The press conference cut to a Q&A session. "Mr. Reynolds," a reporter called out, "can you tell us what prompted this investigation?" Reynolds' expression remained composed, but there was a flash of something in his eyes. "I experienced this discrimination firsthand. As part of my standard practice of visiting our branches incognito to assess their operations, I applied for a commercial loan at one of our Pinnacle Financial branches. Despite presenting impeccable credentials and a sound business proposal, I was rejected, explicitly because of assumptions made about me based on my race." Cameras flashed frantically. Another reporter jumped in. "Can you elaborate on that experience?" "I was told by the branch manager that people like me lacked the financial literacy to handle such investments, that my proposed development would likely turn into a ghetto. When I attempted to address these concerns professionally, I was threatened with security and publicly humiliated." Whitaker felt physically ill. His exact words were now being broadcast nationally. "And what happened to that branch manager?" the reporter pressed. "The individual in question has been terminated, along with several others who enabled similar practices. But this isn't about any single person. It's about changing the systems that allowed this discrimination to flourish." Reynolds stepped back from the podium, allowing Xavier Thompson to take over with details about the specific reforms. Whitaker turned away from the TV, unable to watch anymore. "Turn it off," he whispered to Barbara. She complied, but the damage was done. "They didn't name you explicitly. That's something at least." "It doesn't matter," Whitaker said hollowly. "Everyone in banking will know it was me. Everyone." His phone began buzzing incessantly with texts and calls from colleagues, former mentors, friends in the industry. News traveled fast in banking circles. By evening, he'd be completely radioactive. "Let's focus on the agreement," Barbara said, trying to redirect him. "If you cooperate fully and sign their statement, they'll provide a neutral reference for future non-banking employment. Given the circumstances, that's quite generous." Whitaker laughed bitterly. "Generous? They're destroying everything I've built over 15 years. "You did that yourself," Barbara replied, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "I'm your attorney, not your therapist, but I've reviewed the evidence they've compiled, the recordings, the emails, the pattern of rejections. It's indefensible, Philip." Whitaker had no response. She was right, of course. He had always known what he was doing, had convinced himself it was justified, necessary, even beneficial to the bank. Now those self-serving justifications were crumbling under the weight of reality. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. "The agreement requires you to personally apologize to 10 specific applicants whom you rejected, face to face." "That's humiliating," Whitaker protested. "It's accountability," Barbara corrected him. "And frankly, it's the least you can do." Whitaker stared out the window at the city skyline, the banking district where he had once felt so at home, where he had once had power, respect, influence. "What choice do I have?" he finally asked. "Legally, none, if you want to avoid potentially ruinous litigation." Barbara pushed the agreement toward him. "Morally, that's for you to decide." With a defeated sigh, Whitaker picked up the pen. As he signed his name, his phone buzzed with a new email notification. From Vanessa Harrington. Subject: Please stop calling. Philip, I've been advised by my attorney not to have any further contact with you. Your actions have jeopardized my career and potentially exposed me to legal liability. I've provided investigators with all communications related to our handling of discrimination complaints. Please do not attempt to contact me again. Vanessa. The final support pillar crumbled. Vanessa, who had helped bury those complaints, who had been his ally and confidant, was cutting all ties. It's done, he said, pushing the agreement back to Barbara. What happens now? Now, she said, gathering the documents, you prepare your public statement. Then you find a new career path, preferably one that doesn't involve making decisions that affect other people's financial futures. Whitaker nodded numbly. As Barbara left to deliver the assigned agreement, he remained alone in the conference room, contemplating the ruins of his career. His phone rang. Tyler Bergman, manager of the Downtown branch, and one of his closest colleagues. Tyler, he answered, desperate for some friendly contact. What the hell, Phil? Tyler's voice was cold, distant. I've got reporters calling me asking about our discriminatory practices. They're saying we systematically rejected qualified minority applicants, that we called neighborhoods ghettos and questioned people's financial literacy. Tyler, Save it, Tyler cut him off. I've been cooperating with their investigation. I told them everything, our conversations, how we evaluated certain applications. I'm doing everything I can to save my own job right now. You're throwing me under the bus, I realized aloud. You drove the bus, Phil, right over all of us. Tyler's voice was bitter. Did you think about how your actions would affect the rest of us? The other managers who followed your example? The junior officers you trained to evaluate risk the way you did? I was just trying to protect the bank, Whitaker said weakly. You were protecting your prejudices, Tyler shot back. And now we're all paying for it. I have to go. My attorney's calling. The line went dead. Whitaker placed his phone on the table and buried his face in his hands. Everything, his career, his reputation, his relationships, was disintegrating before his eyes. And somewhere across town, Dominic Reynolds was rebuilding the system Whitaker had exploited for so long. Financial discrimination destroys dreams and perpetuates inequality. Like this video if you believe in equal opportunity for all.
6 months later. Dominic Reynolds straightened his tie as he approached the entrance to Pinnacle Financial's main branch. The same branch where, half a year earlier, Philip Whitaker had rejected his loan application and called security to escort him out. The difference today was stark. As he pushed through the glass doors, he was greeted by a diverse group of employees led by Amara Washington, the former junior loan officer who had been promoted to branch manager after Whitaker's departure. "Mr. Reynolds," she said warmly, extending her hand, "thank you for visiting us today. Everyone is excited about the ribbon cutting." "The excitement is mutual," Dominic replied, shaking her hand. "How are the reforms working at the branch level?" "Transformative," Amara said as she led him through the lobby. "The blind application review process has eliminated so many unconscious biases. Our approval rates are actually up 23%, and our default rates have decreased slightly." Dominic nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we expected. Good lending isn't about excluding certain people or neighborhoods. It's about accurately assessing financial capacity." They reached a conference room where a small gathering had assembled: local business owners, community leaders, bank executives, and a few members of the press. At the center was Kiana Jackson, a young black entrepreneur who had been one of Whitaker's rejected applicants. "Miss Jackson," Dominic greeted her, "today's the big day. How are you feeling?" Kiana smiled broadly. "Nervous, excited, grateful. It still doesn't feel quite real." Well, it's very real, Dominic assured her, gesturing to the large ceremonial check propped on an easel. $200,000 to expand Jackson Wellness Center into the Westview neighborhood, the very development Whitaker claimed would turn into a ghetto. The community needs this center, Kiana said passionately. Westview has been a healthcare desert for too long. With this expansion, we'll be able to serve an additional 5,000 residents who currently have to travel miles for basic healthcare services. Dominic turned to the assembled group. This is exactly the kind of investment banking is supposed to facilitate, projects that generate financial returns while providing vital community benefits. For too long, neighborhoods like Westview were systematically denied this type of investment, not because the numbers didn't work, but because of prejudice and misperception. He nodded to Xavier Thompson, who had joined them. That's why the reforms we've implemented across Global Finance Group aren't just about correcting past injustices, though that's certainly part of it. They're about building a more profitable, sustainable business model that recognizes opportunity where others see only risk. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Reynolds, can you comment on the overall impact of the changes you've implemented? The numbers speak for themselves, Dominic replied. In 6 months, we've approved over $1.2 billion in loans that would have been rejected under the old system. Our default rate on those loans is a mere 0.8%, well below industry average. Our Community Development Fund has financed 348 projects in previously underserved neighborhoods, creating an estimated 2,700 jobs. And what about the applicants who were unfairly rejected in the past? Another reporter asked. We've reviewed over 5,000 previously rejected applications. Approximately 42% should have been approved based on objective financial criteria. We've reached out to all of those applicants to offer new terms, in many cases more favorable than they would have received originally, to account for the opportunity cost of the delay. As the Q&A continued, Dominic noticed a television playing silently in the corner of the room. The screen showed Philip Whitaker leaving a modest office building, looking haggard and diminished. The caption read, "Former bank executive testifies in discrimination lawsuit." Dominic turned away from the screen, focusing instead on the positive changes unfolding around him. The transformation wasn't just about policies and procedures, it was about people, about restoring dignity and opportunity to those who had been unfairly excluded. After the formal ribbon cutting for Kiana's expansion project, Dominic found himself in conversation with Elijah Morris, who had become an influential member of the Community Banking Advisory Board. "Did you ever imagine it would go this far?" Elijah asked, gesturing around the bustling branch where diverse customers were being served by an equally diverse staff. "When Whitaker rejected your application, did you know you'd end up changing the entire banking industry?" Dominic considered the question. "I knew something needed to change," he said finally. "Banking has too much power over people's lives, their dreams, their futures to be wielded inequitably. But no, I didn't anticipate how quickly it would spread beyond our institution." He wasn't exaggerating. In the months since Global Finance Group's reforms had been announced, 3 other major banking conglomerates had implemented similar changes. Banking regulators had launched investigations into discriminatory practices industry-wide. Congress was holding hearings on strengthening fair lending laws. "What happened to Whitaker anyway?" Elijah asked, nodding toward the silent television. "Last I heard he was working at some small financial consulting firm." "Not anymore," Amara joined the conversation. "That firm let him go after clients started pulling their business. Apparently no one wants financial advice from someone who became the poster child for banking discrimination." "I don't take pleasure in his downfall," Dominic said thoughtfully. "The goal was never to punish one person. It was to change a system that allowed, even rewarded, his behavior." "Still," Elijah mused, "there's something poetic about it. The man who rejected countless qualified applicants now can't get hired himself." "The difference," Dominic pointed out, "is that his rejection is based on his actual actions, not on prejudice about who he is. That's accountability, not discrimination." As the event wound down, Dominic found himself back in Amara's office, the same office where Whitaker once sat in judgment of people like him. "I've been meaning to ask you," Amara said, closing the door for privacy. "Why did you choose to apply at this specific branch? Was it random, or did you already suspect issues here?" Dominic smiled. "Nothing calculated. This branch was near a property I was genuinely interested in developing. I didn't come looking for discrimination. It found me, as it had found so many others before." "Well, I'm grateful it did," Amara said sincerely. "Not for what happened to you, of course, but for the changes that resulted. I used to dread coming to work under Whitaker's management. The toxic culture, the subtle pressure to reject certain applications, it was soul-crushing." "And now?" Dominic asked. "Now I'm proud of what we do here," she replied without hesitation. "We're actually fulfilling the promise of banking, helping people build businesses, buy homes, create futures for themselves and their families." Dominic nodded. "That's the banking institution I always believed was possible, one that recognizes its power and uses it responsibly." After saying his goodbyes, Dominic walked through the lobby one last time. A young black couple was meeting with the loan officer, smiling as they received preliminary approval for their first mortgage. A Hispanic business owner was depositing a large check, the fruits of a recently expanded restaurant. An elderly Asian woman was opening an account with the help of a patient banker. All of this, was what banking should be. Not a gatekeeper preserving privilege, but a gateway, opening doors of opportunity. Outside, Dominic paused on the same steps where 6 months earlier he had been humiliated and dismissed. His phone buzzed with a notification. The board had approved the final phase of the Reynolds Initiative for Financial Equality, a comprehensive program to identify and address systemic barriers to financial inclusion. As he walked to his car, Dominic reflected on the journey. What had begun as a simple loan application had transformed into something far more significant, a reckoning long overdue, a reformation desperately needed. Somewhere across town, Philip Whitaker was facing the consequences of his actions, learning the hard lesson that prejudice carries a cost, not just for its victims, but eventually for its perpetrators. But Whitaker's story was no longer the focus. The spotlight had shifted to the thousands of Kiana Jacksons and Elijah Morrises who were finally receiving the opportunities they earned and deserved all along. To the communities that were being revitalized with investments that should have come years ago. To a banking system slowly becoming more equitable, more inclusive, more just. Sometimes it takes someone with power to change the system from within. Subscribe if you believe one person can make a difference. The true measure of progress isn't in punishing those who did wrong, but in creating systems where doing right becomes the norm, where fairness isn't exceptional but expected, where opportunity isn't a privilege but a promise kept. Dominic Reynolds had kept his promise, and in doing so, he had changed not just a bank, but what banking could be.